All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So in today's presentation, we are talking all about building strong ankles for hiking, which is such an important topic because there are so many hikers out there who really do struggle with their ankles on the trail and find that it holds them back on their adventures. So today we're going to be going into this subject in a little bit of detail and talk about how you can build them up and get them feeling great for the trail. So before we get into things, quick little overview of who I actually am if you haven't come across my stuff before. My name is Rowan Smith. I'm the founder of Summit Strength, which is an online personal training service specifically for hikers. Essentially, we help hikers in a few different situations. We help a lot of hikers have a big trip coming up. They want to be in a really fantastic position to properly enjoy their adventure. We work with a lot of hikers who do struggle with aches and pains on and off the trail, and that's the context we're talking through today. And we also work with a lot of hikers who may not have a big trip coming up, may not have an ankle pain holding them back, but they just realize their fitness, their condition holds them back their adventures in one way or another. Now, for myself, I've been doing this for years and years and years now. I've personally trained and prepared over 400 hikers for pretty much every adventure imaginable. These days, it's not just me as part of the team. We do have a few other people working as part of the Summit Strength family. Essentially, through the context that we're talking through today, I just want to be really, really clear on this front. My role is I'm not a physiotherapist. I'm not a physical therapist. I do not do early rehab. So if you've just sprained your ankle, if it's all blown up, and if you've broken your ankle or whatever it may be, this presentation, these ideas are not really for you. Essentially, where I come into this particular picture is I'm what's called a return to performance specialist, in the sense that when it comes down to aches, pains, injuries, there is often a bit of a gap between traditional rehab, which you'll go through a physiotherapist, a physical therapist. They'll kind of get you to a point where you're through your early stages of recovery, you're released for normal exercise. And there is a little bit of a gap between being released for normal exercise and being kind of pretty comfortable day-to-day life and actually being ready for the specific demands of the trail. Because hiking does have a lot of demands, uphills, downhills, long days, rough terrain, and this and that. And there is a big gap between those two things. So a lot of hikers do find themselves a little bit lost when they get released for normal exercise and they go out hiking again, they're in pain again, and it ends up being this bit of a recurring cycle. So essentially my role is I sort of fill this gap. I help hikers bridge that early rehab to actually getting out on the trail. And that's the context we're talking through today. So it's not so much if you just had an ankle incident, if your ankle's in a cast or something like that, still focus on your rehab and work with your specialist. But once you're out the other end, these ideas can definitely help. So starting off with, ankle issues, really, really, really common for a lot of hikers. Typically when we're talking about ankle issues and kind of what I'm talking about today, it really falls into two categories. Number one is just general ankle pain. So when you're hiking along and your ankles are just uncomfortable, either during the hike or after the hike, and you're like, hey, there's just a bit of pain here. And then the other side of things is actual ankle sprains, when you step on a loose rock in a pothole and you literally twist your ankle and it ends up getting a little bit uncomfortable. For some people, this will happen, once in a blue moon and it'll just be a random occurrence. For some people, it'll happen again and again and again and again and again. Because the tricky thing with ankle sprains is every single time you sprain it or roll it or whatever it may be, if you don't rebuild the ankles and put some focus into actually building up the structures around it, it gets more and more likely it'll happen again. So a lot of hikers out there are just in this recurring thing where the second they step in a pothole, the second they step on a rock, they just roll their ankle. It's just this long-term thing, which is not much fun. Now, when it comes down to the ankle pain and ankle sprains, there are a lot of factors which can go into preventing these two things. And when it comes to pain prevention and injury prevention, it's a massive, multifaceted topic. And it's so many different things that goes into this. But today we're going to be diving into specifically strengthening and how a hiker can use strengthening and specific exercises to help support their ankles on the trail. To be clear, there are lots more things that goes into this whole picture, but we're going to be honing in on the strengthening side of things. So, before we go any further, I just want to cover why ankle pain is so common for hikers. Now, honestly, because, it is a really, really, really common thing, and this is for a few reasons. Now, number one, pretty obvious, but the uneven nature of the trail. Obviously, when we're hiking, we're not on nice, well-manicured footpaths. There's rocks, there's potholes, there's roots, there's mud, there's riverbanks, all of this stuff, which obviously puts us at a risk of taking a bad step and spraining a roll in the ankle, or just constantly having to stabilize the ankle in weird positions, which can lead to a little bit of pain. Fatigue. Now, fatigue is a pretty big risk factor, both in pain and sprains, in the sense of when we get to this stage where we're physically tired and we're not really paying attention, our legs are jelly, we're not really lifting our legs so well, or mentally tired when we're just not paying attention, it greatly increases the risk of just general pain creeping up, but also having an incident like an ankle sprain, because mentally we're just not quite there. Physically, our legs aren't really doing what we need, and the likelihood of sort of taking a bad step greatly increases. Lack of concentration. So even outside of just the fatigue side of things, a lot of the times when we're on the trail, there'll be things we want to look at. There'll be birds, there'll be nice vistas, there'll be just chatting away with friends. We're not always constantly looking down at the trail. And this can often lead us to taking dodgy steps. There's added external load. So obviously carrying weight in the pack, whether it's a day pack or a full pack or anything in between, for every extra kilo we put on our back, it puts quite a bit of a disproportionate amount of extra force through our feet and through our ankles. So that's another factor there. And all of these things, by themselves, they're not usually a big deal. If you are just tired, walking around day to day, not a big deal. If you've got a pack walking around the local neighborhood, it's not a big deal. But you put these things together in the hiking context and they can kind of create the sort of perfect storm for ankle issues. So essentially what we want to be doing with our training is thinking, okay, what can we do to prepare the body for reducing some of these things creeping up, better be able to tolerate these things creeping up, and in the worst case scenario, if something does go wrong, having less chance of that turning into something bad. And that's kind of what we're looking at with our training. Now, the typical solution for ankle pain, and this is something most hikers will tend to, is like they have a history of like rolling or spraining the ankles. They have a history of pain. Most hikers will typically fall into, one of two solutions. And that'll either be wearing high top boots, and wearing really, really supportive boots like this picture here, or an ankle brace. These are sort of the most common things you'll see when you go online. You're like, hey, how do I prevent ankle sprains while hiking? They'll say, hey, wear high top boots or whatever it may be. You see it all the time. And, these particular things can be beneficial because they do provide more external support to your ankles. If your ankles are a little bit weak, they don't have enough stabilizing power, these things, whether it's a brace or high top boots, they can provide external support, which can be beneficial. But in all honesty, they are a bit of a band-aid solution in the sense that, if you are not taking steps to build up and support your ankles, and actually developing the structures inside your ankles, and you're just relying on these things, then ultimately you're kind of stuck. And if you'll always have to wear high top boots, and the second you sort of transition out of them or you forget them or they break, then you're going to be at risk of pain again. Or the same thing with the ankle brace. Maybe you'll just have to wear that for month after month, after year after year. It's a never-ending thing. So ultimately, these things are fine, but we never want them as just the one solution. We never want to be 100% relying on them because you do want to take steps to help support the ankles naturally. So in the situation, if you forget your boots or they break or you transition or you try something else or whatever it may be, you're going to be at a better risk of being comfortable. So spending time strengthening your ankles is a very good use of your time. Now, today, what we're going to be diving into is really 3 types of strengthening I personally think you should consider for your ankles. That's going to be direct ankle strengthening, general leg strengthening, and proprioception or balance work. And we'll break these down. I'll give you exercise examples for each. So to start with, let's talk about direct ankle strengthening. Now, this is basically probably the first place to look, and it's the most logical thing that goes into building up ankle strength. And this essentially just involves doing exercises which just strengthen up directly the structures and muscles which directly support the ankles. And they're pretty common sense because you're like, ankles are weak, I'm going to do exercises to support them. Pretty straightforward. So these ones are things that people have probably come across before, like things like calf raises or banded exercise for your ankles and this and that. You may have seen them used online before. You may have been given them from a physio and this and that. I'll show you some examples in a second. In all honesty, this type of stuff can be a little bit dull and a little bit boring to do on their own. And one of the common themes that I often hear from a lot of hikers is they see a physio, they see a physical therapist, they're given these exercises to do, they're doing for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then they're just bored out of their mind. And they stop doing them, they fall out of them, they don't be consistent, they don't really get the best results. So ultimately, the way that I like to use these particular exercises is basically when you're looking at your other training. And when you're looking at your training through the week, if you're doing strength training, if you're doing cardio, whatever it may be, is basically as opposed to worrying about these direct ankle strengthening exercises, just doing them at home as random sessions. I like to incorporate them into our other training. So if you're doing a warm up before a session, you could spend 2, 3, 4 minutes doing these exercises. And that sometimes can be a really good way of both warming up, but also incorporating this type of thing as well. Or if you're having rest periods, if you're doing traditional strength training where you do an exercise, then you rest, then you do an exercise, then you rest, then you do an exercise, then you rest, all that rest period you can be using productively, and you can do these type of exercises here and there. I'll give you some ideas in a little bit further in the presentation around how you can kind of figure that out and put these things together on your own. But I just want to sort of say, this stuff can be a bit boring. So you want to get a little bit creative around how you can slip it into your week so you can do it consistently and get the benefits out of this type of thing. So to give you a few examples of this direct ankle strengthening, I'll give you 3 simple exercise examples. First and foremost, bent leg calf raises, a really, really simple exercise. Basically what this involves is basically holding onto a pole, bending your legs, and then pushing up into your toes. Really, 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 really simple. Essentially, this particular exercise works the calves, and specifically it focuses a little bit more on what's called the soleus, which is the lower muscle on the calf, a little bit deeper in the calf. And then when we're having this bent leg version, it really, really focuses in towards this. Now, for this particular exercise, very, very straightforward. If you do this and you're like, actually, this is really, really hard, and it's very, very difficult, then, just only do a few at a time. So do 3 or 4 or 5, have a rest, and then do it again. If you do find this is a bit easy and you give this a go, you can do 1 leg at a time. So this is a double-legged version. You can do 1 leg at a time, or you could even add a step, so you get a little bit more range of motion, or even add a little bit of weight. Wear a backpack on your back, or hold a dumbbell or something like that. Very, very simple. But that's it's very, very common sense, but this is a simple exercise which can play a pretty big role for the ankles. Now, on the other side of this is another variation of the calf raise, which a lot of hikers are pretty familiar with. And this is what's called a straight leg calf raise. And essentially what we're doing is pretty similar movement, but as opposed to having the knees bent, the legs are pretty straight. Now, this particular version of the calf raise, it'll put a bit more emphasis into what's called the gastrocnemius, which is like the higher bit of the calf, which is just as important. So to get the best benefits out of our calf strengthening, which will help our ankles, we want to make sure we're hitting both the soleus and the gastrocnemius. So this bent leg stuff and this straight leg stuff. And the combination of the two go really, really well. Now, for this particular version, this is a single-legged version of a step. There's lots of different ways you can adjust around this. If you do this and you're like, hey, this feels pretty good, you can start with body weight and then slowly add a little bit of weight. And in this version, you can see I've got a backpack on my back, which you can add a little bit of weight, or you can hold dumbbells. If you find this is a little bit too hard, you can basically do this off the floor, so you don't have to be on the step, or you can do it 2 legs at a time, or whatever it may be. But essentially, the idea is just to find a version that kind of works for you, and then over time, make it a little bit more difficult. And then basically the third sort of direct ankle strengthening. The first 2 have really been looking at the calves, which are probably the main priority in regards to the ankles. Now, this one is sort of working through the ankles in a few different ranges of motion. And it basically just involves you getting a TheraBand or an exercise band or something like that. And basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to do little flexes in a bunch of different directions. So in this example, you've got the first one. You can kind of see, let's skip. You wrap a band around your foot, and then you're basically just doing little toe points. And you're literally just pointing in and out, in and out, in and out. And you do like 20 repetitions or so. And then essentially the next version is we're going to do little feet on the outside and go out, in, out, in, out, in. And then the next version, we go the other way. So basically wrapping the band another way, and we're going to go in, out, in, out, in, out. And then we're basically just doing each of the ways, each of the different directions. So forward, back, side, side. Very, very simple. Now, this particular exercise, it just kind of just strengthens up the ankle in slightly different ranges of motion and different sort of areas, which can be really, really, really useful. Because one of the things which I didn't mention before is for people who do have those recurring ankle sprains and recurring ankle pains, typically these structures around the ankles are a little bit weak. So strengthening this stuff up can go a really long way. Now, for this particular exercise, if you aren't doing this type of stuff, I would probably say this version, this exercise, keep the reps a little bit more controlled than sort of, is in this video demonstration. So you can see in the video, they're just like going in and out, in and out, in and out. I like to keep them a little bit more controlled, a little bit more steady. And then ultimately, if you do this and you're like, hey, this is super easy, then maybe use a bit of a thicker band. And you can make this as easy or as difficult as you want using different types of intensity. So basically, there are 3 types of direct ankle strengthening exercises: that bent leg calf raise, straight leg calf raise, and that banded stuff. Covers most of our bases in regards to direct ankle strengthening. Very, very effective. Now, the next area we kind of want to consider when it comes down to helping support the ankle is what we call general leg strengthening. So we spend a bit of time on those other exercises on the direct ankle strengthening. This is general leg strengthening. And essentially when it comes down to supporting the ankles, it is important to make sure that the hips and the knees are nice and stable as well. Because ultimately, if the supporting muscles of the hips and the knees are a little bit weak, or maybe a little bit unstable, or maybe just fatiguing too early on your trail, this can have a little bit of cascade effect down towards the ankles, because the whole body is connected. And if the hips get really tired, or they just aren't not doing their job, or the knees get really tired, then the ankles can end up being a little bit out of whack, which is, affects us. Ultimately, on the flip side of things, if these areas are strong, if the hips are strong, if the supporting muscles of the knees are strong, this gives the ankles a better chance of just staying stable, both when you're just walking along in a normal situation and also when things go wrong. And if you step in a pothole or step on a loose rock or anything it may be. And on top of this, building up your leg strength in general will improve your hiking in a variety of other ways as well. So in all honesty, I say all hikers should be doing this anyway, but in the high ankle context, this can really go a long way. Now, when we're looking at ankle strengthening through general leg strengthening, what we want to be really focusing on and putting a bit more attention to is what we call closed chain exercises, which is basically just a fancy way of saying doing leg exercises where your foot is actually connected to the ground. Now, the flip side of this is what's called open chain exercises, where basically your foot is in the air. So this might be doing something like on a leg extension machine, where you're in the gym, sitting on your bum, you're on a machine, and your leg's going up and down, up and down. Now, the foot itself is just in the air, and it's not connected to the floor. Now, there's nothing wrong with this type of exercise. It does have its place, and it can be really beneficial. But when we're looking at this ankle context, ideally we want the foot on the floor and working on this closed chain so that ankle can, get a little bit of work, and we can teach the body as it's working as a whole to really support and stabilize it. So a couple of simple exercises here. One leg exercise I love is the step down exercise. I get pretty much all my hikers doing this regardless if they've got ankle issues or not. But basically what this involves is standing on a step, box, whatever it may be, and just literally just slowly lowering down the floor, touching your heel, and then coming up. Really simple. This particular exercise is super beneficial at developing strength and stability through the quadriceps and a little bit of the glutes. On top of this, you can kind of see, as we're going through the exercise before, you can kind of see knees wobbling around. So we're challenging knee stability, we're challenging hip stability, and also they're challenging ankle stability. And you kind of see the ankles are sort of wobbling around a bit as well. Very simple, but very effective. And in the hiking context, can be really useful in a lot of different situations. Now, for this particular exercise, if you try it and you give it a go and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm wobbling all over the shop, easiest thing is just use a couple of trekking poles, give you some extra balance, or hold onto a chair or something like that. If you do it and you're like, oh, this is way too easy, then you can basically just use a higher step, or you can even hold some weight, in dumbbells or on your pack or something like that. You can make this as easy or as difficult as you want. So very effective. Now, another flip side in regards to general leg strengthening is this exercise, the single leg deadlift. So the step down we were talking about before works the quadriceps, which is the front of the thighs, a little bit of the glutes, which is a bum. The single leg deadlifts basically works the flip side of that. So the hamstrings, which are the back of the thighs, and a little bit more of the glutes as well. So what this involves is basically one leg on the floor, and we're basically just tipping at the hips, coming straight down, and then coming up. And we're basically just doing this. Now, this particular exercise, again, really great for hamstrings and glutes, helps knee stability, helps hip stability, and also for the ankles, again, you'll be wobbling around quite a bit, so they're getting quite a bit of work there. Now, for this one, if you do it and you're like, hey, I'm just wobbling around too much, this is too hard, then you can use trekking poles for balance again, have one in one hand and use support. If you find this a little bit too easy, you can basically just load it up with a bit of weight. Hold a dumbbell in one or two hands, just load that up a little bit heavier, can go a long way. So there are just a couple of examples in regards to that direct ankle strengthening. Now, the third area of sort of strengthening we kind of want to look at when it comes down to ankle issues is what we call balance and proprioception or proprioception training, which is pretty much the same thing. Essentially, proprioception, I'm not pronouncing that very well, but basically what that is the awareness of the position and movement of your body. Now, this is really important to help your body on uneven terrain, which we're get exposed to a lot when we're on the trail. Now, essentially what this means is if we can improve our proprioception, we'll better be able to sense if things are not right. So when it comes down to proprioception, it's not so much we just sort of see, hey, we step on a foot and we step on a loose rock and we see the foot go in a weird position, but this is whether the actual foot will sense what's going on. So in this sort of situation, if you're walking along and you step in a pothole. Now, if your proprioception is up to where it needs to be, you'll probably have a better chance of catching yourself if things go wrong, and basically be able to reorientate yourself, not fully follow through on the bad step or whatever it may be, or if you're just unbalanced, actually not being able to fall over, which is good. On the flip side of things, if your proprioception isn't up to scratch, maybe a little bit, not quite where it needs to be, then maybe you won't catch yourself. Maybe you'll have a tumble, have a fall, or whatever it is. So developing balanced proprioception, very, very effective. Now, one thing that's really, really, really relevant when it comes down to ankle pain is basically if you are one of those people I was mentioning before who does have a bit of a history in regards to ankle sprains, and you regularly roll your ankle, or you've done it a bunch of times in the past, essentially every time we sprain our ankle, it will significantly impact and negatively impact our proprioception, and it will reduce it and get it worse and worse and worse. So if you're that type of person who constantly rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls, this more than likely probably does need a little bit of work. So it's something to really, really be important of. Now, when it comes down to balanced proprioception training, there's 1,000,001 things you can do. You don't have to get too crazy, too complicated with this. So I'll show you a couple of examples I quite like. Now, this example is something that's called around the world. Really, really simple. You can do this pretty much anywhere. Basically, in this example, we're standing on one leg, ideally barefoot for this particular version. We've got some type of weight. So you can use a dumbbell, using a kettlebell. You can use a loaded backpack, whatever it may be. And literally, we're just standing on one leg and then just rotating this dumbbell around, and in one direction a few repetitions, in the other direction a few repetitions. Now you'll notice when you do this is the ankle a little bit kind of wobbling around a little bit, and it will be quite hard to sort of keep stable. And as that weight's going around, that'll challenge us to stay stable in this range of motion. Very, very simple. And then if you do want to make this a little bit more difficult, as you can see in this particular example, I'm standing on a mat, which basically a folded up mat, which just makes it a little bit more difficult compared to the floor. You can use a thicker mat. You can use a pillow. You can stand on a Bosu ball, one of those sort of blow up balls, a stability disc, or whatever it may be. Very, very, very simple, but very, very effective. Now, another example of this type of exercise, a balance exercise, is like what we call the 3-cone balance drill, which is really simple. So you're on one leg, you put 3 cones out in front of you, and literally all you're doing is just reaching out and touching each cone, doing one leg and then doing the other leg. As you can see for me, I don't have too many issues in regards to balanced proprioception, but I'm wobbling all over the shop here. It's a relatively challenging exercise and can be really beneficial. Now, if you do this version, as you can see, I'm standing on a mat here. So if you do this and you're like, hey, this is too hard, just do it from the floor and have directly on the floor. Or alternatively, if you feel like it's a little bit too easy, use something that's a little bit more unstable. So a thicker mat, a pillow, Bosu ball, stability disc, anything like that. So there are a few ideas there. So essentially, so far what we've covered that direct ankle strengthening, giving 3 simple examples there. We covered the general leg strengthening, giving 2 simple examples there, and the balance and proprioception training, giving you 2 simple examples there. And if you cover those 3 bases, it can go a long way. Now, when it comes down to this type of training, any type of exercise done in isolation, either just by itself or just repeated on week after week, month after month, it's only going to do you so good. The long-term improvement, to really make sure you are improving and getting the best results from this type of thing, progression is key. Now, what I mean by that is the body, when it gets applied and gets stimulus or stress or a challenge, it gets used to new things pretty quickly. In the sense of the body gets a new challenge, it'll be like, I don't like that challenge. So the body will adapt, it'll change, it'll grow in certain ways to make that challenge a little bit more comfortable. And that's basically the essence of training. Now, if we just keep on doing the same thing over and over and over and over, the body will adapt to that thing, but then it won't really want to adapt any more because we're not giving it new challenge. We're not forcing it to get uncomfortable. So to get the best results out of training over time, we want to make things a little bit more difficult, a little bit more difficult, a little bit more difficult to ensure that it's constantly being challenged, getting the stimulus it needs, and adapting and getting stronger and more resilient. So typically with these types of exercises that I recommend here, I usually recommend progressing these exercises in one way or another every 3 to 4 weeks. So essentially you would do these exercises, you choose one of these versions and you do it for 3 to 4 weeks and just work through the exercise, challenge yourself, push yourself. And then after 3 to 4 weeks, then we're like, okay, how can I make this exercise a little bit more difficult for myself? So examples of this might include changing from a double to a single-legged exercise. So, in that very first example, I showed you that bent leg calf raise. You might spend four weeks doing bent legs with 2 legs and do that for 4 weeks. And then the next 4 weeks, you go on to 1 leg at a time. That's a progression and that's a significant extra challenge. Or you can increase the range of motion. So if you're doing those calf raises, you might do 4 weeks on the floor and then 4 weeks off a step. Or if you're doing that 3-cone balance, you might do 4 weeks using cones and then 4 weeks just touching the floor or something like that. Or you could do a slightly different version of an exercise. So sometimes it doesn't have to be the same thing where you just make harder, but you can choose a different exercise which will work similar muscles. So an example of this is doing the single leg calf raise, which I showed you before. And then you might do that for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or work through a series of progressions. Then you're like, you know what, I need a change. I work out at a gym. I have access to a leg press. I might do calf raises on a leg press. You know, that's an example. It's still working the same muscles, still very, very similar, but it's just a different change. Or you might just add weight or resistance. So you may do 4 weeks of body weight, then 4 weeks with a bit of a weight, and then 4 weeks with more weight, or whatever it may be. Lots of different options, but the main key is just making sure you choose something and regularly progress things. Now, ultimately, when it comes down to this, obviously I've given you a few example exercises. Obviously, I've given you a few bits and pieces. Fully understand if this whole concept of, okay, that kind of makes sense, but how does this kind of go into a workout? What reps should I be doing? How many sets should I be doing? How should I be resting and this and that? Obviously, I haven't covered that today. So if you were sort of interested in that type of thing, I do have something cool for you. Basically, I have a free little mini course around strength training for hiking, where basically it covers, you know, the benefits of strength training for hiking. So today we've been diving into ankles specifically, but this talks about a bit more of the broader benefits. It talks through the understanding the principles of effective strength training. So we just touched on progression there, which is one of them, but there are a few other areas that are really important to ensure you get the best out of your strength training. And it also teaches you how to create your own strength workouts, and basically how you can take exercises like these or other examples that I sort of have in the course and how to actually put together your own workouts. So it's well structured, so it's going to be progressed over time, and so you're covering all your bases, which are going to help your ankles as well as your hiking. Now, if you did want to get access to this free course, you can basically just go to summitstrength.com.au/strength-mini-course. From there, you can sign up. It's completely free, and it will help you fill in the gaps of some of the ideas around this presentation. So if you want to get access to that, go to summitstrength.com.au/strength-mini-course and get your hands on that. Now, essentially coming into this, you know, we've covered direct ankle strengthening, general leg strengthening, and balanced proprioception work. And ultimately, if you do put these 3 types of exercises together and you can string them into your weekly routine and you can progress them over time, this will go a long way into building up and strengthening your ankles for the trail. However, as we sort of said at the start of the presentation, when it comes down to preventing ankle pain and strains, strengthening is one part of the picture. It's a very important part, but it's only one part of it. And there are lots of other things you probably should be paying attention to. Now, other factors, if you do have a history of ankle pain and sprains, other factors you need to keep in your mind are conditioning and fitness. Because as we said before, fatigue and exhaustion is a risk factor both for pain and ankle sprains. So essentially you want to be thinking about how can I minimize fatigue on the trail, and conditioning and fitness goes a long way. You want to be thinking about mobility. So when it comes down to ankle pain, some people will have super hypermobile ankles, and they'll be that type of person, their ankles are really loose. And those types of people, you probably don't really need to do a huge amount of mobility. But on the flip side, some people that get ankle pain have really tight ankles, and they're really restricted. So sometimes putting a bit of mobility work can go a long way there. There's a whole concept of exposure to specific challenges, in the sense that when it comes down to hiking, there are certain sort of triggers that can often lead to ankle pain. So specifically, it may be going on rock hopping, or it may be carrying a heavy pack, or it may be being on a traverse or something like that. And essentially, if you're aware there's certain triggers that cause ankle pain, then we want to think, okay, how can we expose the ankles to this in a controlled environment so you can slowly but surely build up tolerance to these types of things? Footwear changes, you know, there's a whole idea around full supporter boots, mid-tier boots, zero drop shoes, barefoot shoes, all of this. And we need to be aware of, okay, there's pros and cons for each type of footwear, but one of the biggest issues a lot of people fall into is when they're dramatically changing their footwear and they go from high top boots to another thing, the ankles do take a while to adjust to that type of thing. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that if you struggle with ankle pain and issues. Then there's a whole concept of load management in regards to how much hiking, how much walking, how much stress is actually going through your ankles on a weekly and monthly basis, and how can I manage that? There are many other factors when it comes down to really getting on top of your ankles. And each of these are just as important as strengthening. And obviously, if we went into all of this stuff, I'd be talking for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. But it is stuff that is important to keep on top of your mind. And ultimately, if you do this strengthening and you stick with it and you're like, hey, I'm still struggling with this type of stuff and I'm not covering these things, there are the areas you want to look at. So hopefully, when it comes down to this has given you a few ideas around helping your ankles for the trail. As I said, it's a big topic, but hopefully it's just opened up your eyes, giving you a few ideas to work on, and hopefully it can help. However, if you do need a little bit of help putting this all together, and you're like, hey, you know what? I'm not 100% sure how to apply this into my particular situation. I'm not 100% sure about how to plan out a training week. I'm not 100% sure about how to figure out this progression over time. And I just want to make sure I'm doing exactly what I need to be in the best possible position. I would love to chat with you. Now, through Summit Strength, we offer personalized training programs for hikers to help them get fit, strong, and resilient for their adventures. Now, typically what our packages include, it will create a custom and personalized workout program to get you ready for anything the trail may throw at you, to not only build up the ankles, but build up the body as a whole, incorporating strength training, cardio, recovery, mobility work, and also hiking training, and fitting that around you, your life, your needs, and your situation. We also do put a big emphasis into educating you around all the peripheral factors that will affect both your ankles and your hiking. So we have a big module around ankle pain prevention. We talk through fatigue management, conditioning, nutrition, recovery, and a bunch of other things that can help your hiking. And we also give you the coaching, accountability, and support to keep you on track through the ups and downs or whatever may come up. Because one of the biggest things you need to do is just be able to stick with your training and stick with your ideas and stick with your strategies over the long term so you actually see the results. So if you did want to learn a little bit more about our training, what you can do is go to summitstrength.com.au/online. On there, there's a big video which talks through our programs, how we go about things, and just gives you a little extra insight into how we help hikers. And if it does sound like it's something you want to learn a little bit more about, on that page, you can book a free call with our team where we can sit down, get to know you, have a really solid chat around you, your situation, and your needs. And ultimately, if it does sound like something we may be able to help you out with, we can talk you through how our training works, talk you through one of our packages, and ultimately you can make a decision if and how it may be right for you. So if you were interested, go to summitstrength.com.au/online and you can check it out from there. But all in all, I hope you got some good ideas from today's presentation. And I really do hope these exercises, this sort of structure, and these insights can make a big difference for a lot of people who struggle with ankle pain on the trail. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.